Also later, Congressman Francis Rooney, Republican from Southwest Florida, on President's meetings with NATO leaders in Brussels and more. Plus your calls. We'll be right back.
Sunday night on Q&A.
When she came back a few days later, she saw me sitting in the aisle and she physically tossed it at me and said, "No change." I decided right then and there, I'm going to get that amendment ratified.
Gregory Watson, the man responsible for getting the 27th Amendment to the Constitution ratified.
And I'll never forget it, Brian. I was in the library downtown Austin, Texas, and I came across a book that had in it a chapter, an entire chapter, devoted to amendments that had passed Congress, but not enough state legislatures had approved. And this one just jumped right out at me. It said, "No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened." And I can remember standing in the aisle, holding that book in my hand, and it was as if lightning had struck. I could feel the pulsating electricity of it all. And I thought, you know what? Instead of writing about the Equal Rights Amendment and this disputed extension in its ratification deadline, why don't I instead write about this amendment that says when members of Congress want to adjust their salaries, they have to wait till the next election?
Sunday night at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. C-SPAN, where history unfolds daily. In 1979, C-SPAN was created as a public service by America's cable television companies. And today, we continue to bring you unfiltered coverage of Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court, and public policy events in Washington, D.C. and around the country. C-SPAN is brought to you by your cable or satellite provider. Washington Journal continues.
Well, joining us now is Delegate Stacey Plaskett, Democrat from the Virgin Islands, a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. So your committee and the Judiciary Committee in the House have called Peter Strzok to testify.
Yes.
Big hearing tomorrow, live 10 a.m. on C-SPAN 3. Remind us of who Peter Strzok is, why you've called him, and what you're looking for.
Well, Peter Strzok, as you may recall, was involved in the investigation of Secretary Hillary Clinton's emails. He and another FBI agent, Lisa Page, had been involved in a relationship, and in the investigation of that investigation, it was discovered that they had quite a number of text messages using government phones between them, which talked about their dislike of then candidate, now President Trump, as well as the investigation.
So what are you looking to hear?
Well, I'm actually not clear what we're going to be looking to hear from him specifically. We conducted 2 weeks ago an 11-hour hearing, deposition of Peter Strzok by members of the House Judiciary and Oversight Committee, in which time he really expounded on, and you can imagine 11 hours, expounded on everything. I think the purpose that Chairman Gowdy and Chairman Goodlatte calling this is to now bring to the public what happened in that deposition.
And put this whole thing in context with the investigation. How important is tomorrow's event?
I'm not really clear how important this is going to be. It's optically important to the Republicans to be able to have this hearing, but in terms of this moving the ball forward, I don't think we're going to do this. Paul, right now, what we're doing is having an investigation of the investigation of the investigation. And I think that we have exhausted what it is we're going to have. If you recall, several weeks ago, we also had a hearing with Michael Horowitz, who's the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, who testified under oath as to what his findings were about investigating Peter Strzok. So the Republicans were not satisfied with the testimony of Michael Horowitz, who has been longstanding IG at the Justice Department, of what his findings are. And I think they want now to do the public hearing of Peter Strzok in this.
Let's put the phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for the delegate. Stacey Plaskett, Democrat from the Virgin Islands. Democrats call 202-748-8000. Republicans 748-8001. Independents 202-748-8002. Our guest is a member of the Government Reform Committee in the House of Representatives, and also serves transportation infrastructure.
Right, as well as agriculture. So, you know, what to me is a little galling, and, you know, frankly, I'm a little surprised at Trey Gowdy in this, in terms of the chairman of Oversight and Government Reform, because it has been his position in the past that he would rather conduct behind closed doors interview, because he's told me specifically that he believes that more information comes out when you conduct the interviews behind closed doors than when you do them in the hearings, which he has said is merely, you know, members' posture, and they act outside of themselves of what they would really be doing if you were having a depositions. Both of us have been prosecutors in the past. I worked at the Justice Department. He's been a federal prosecutor, and you know that the depositions, you're going to get the information you need. The Republicans, while wanting the special counsel's investigation to be over, are now 2 years that we had the Benghazi hearing. Nothing was found at that. And so now they're extending that hearing in itself by having this hearings of Peter Strzok to talk about the emails, to try and still drum up additional fodder from this.
A couple of other items before we get to calls. We had read that Peter Strzok's attorney is asking for the transcript from last week's closed-door testimony be released. Have you seen the transcript yet? Do you know if and when it's going to be released? And how important is it?
I think the transcript is very important. I, as a witness, and if I had a client as an attorney, they disclosed things and they answered numerous questions. And to keep those in context, having the transcript, he can refer back to it when he's answering the questions to what he told individuals there. I know that Lisa Page as well has been asked now to testify. She said that she would like to get the transcript as well. She would like to know what the interview questions are what the questions are going to be. And I suspect that they'll move to subpoena or possibly even hold her in contempt.
This might be news for you. It was news for us this morning. Washington Times. Page won't appear for this House hearing.
Exactly.
It says the former anti-Trump FBI lawyer and member of the special counsel Robert Mueller's team, she said last night she won't attend this hearing. Any idea why?
And I think that, you know, it's very short notice. She was just told that they wanted her to testify yesterday. She has asked for information to be able to review that before testifying, and the Republicans have refused to give her that information. So you know, in terms of the procedures under the committee rules, the committee chair now has to give, if he wants to issue a subpoena, he has to do so by informing the ranking member, the Democrat, of that, and then allow 2 days for the individual to come and testify. So we'll see if that happens and what Lisa Page does after that.
Well, let's get to those calls for Delegate Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands and remind folks that the Peter Strzok hearing, this Joint House Committee hearing, is tomorrow, 10 a.m. We'll have it live for you on C-SPAN. You could watch it at cspan.org as well, live, and listen on the C-SPAN free radio app. Let's hear from Barbara, Oklahoma City. You're up first.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just appalled at what's going on. I just can't understand how anyone can make the FBI do anything like this. Don't they decide what the judicial system? And it seems like they're not. That everything that he's putting, all of them, America, they're on the border, watching the border. Which his wife came here illegally, and she's a good person. You know, I'm not putting her down. And she came here. She worked as a nude model illegally, and he keeps saying we can't do anything about this border, and he keeps doing this to the FBI where everything's on the FBI. Why isn't there someone that can say, no, I don't have to do that. I don't have to give you my information. Mueller.
Independent caller there, Barbara. Go ahead, please.
Yes, well, what we've noticed is that you'll see from FBI Director now, Chris Wray, the special counsel, they're continuing their work, and they're operating in a professional manner. And the House, as well as the Senate, does have jurisdiction over these agencies to be able to ask them to come and explain what they've done. The travesty that's happening is that much of the work that the people of America brought us to is not getting done. We still don't have a transportation or an infrastructure bill. The president, that was one of the first things that he said he wanted to get done. We have not been able to engage in that. There are a lot of other areas that we have not been able to engage in because we have put so much of our energy on investigations that were already done. Trey Gowdy said in the last hearing when we were talking with Michael Horowitz that the special counsel's investigation, which has lasted now a little over a year, is tearing the country apart and to close it down. And you have to remember, he has also been able to bring 20 indictments against individuals and had 5 guilty pleas from this investigation already, whereas the Benghazi hearing, which lasted for 2 years, ended up with none.
Our guest is a graduate of Georgetown University, also has a law degree from American University here in Washington, the College of Law there. Stacey Plaskett, born in Brooklyn, parents were from St. Croix, served as special counsel for the House Ethics Committee and worked at DOJ, as she mentioned, for Attorney General Larry Thompson, Deputy Attorney General, and then took over when James Comey took over, you stayed on. I want to make sure I have all that right. Sam is calling from Foxborough, Massachusetts now on the Independent line. Hi.
Hey, good morning, Stacey. I hope everything.
Good morning.
Good morning. Regarding Lisa Page, do you think that she's sort of not doing this because of Peter and them not releasing the transcripts and the fact that it looks like a dog and pony show? This is something that's, shouldn't be happening when the president is biased against Comey, biased against everybody else. He's using the same argument against other people. But I also want to just get a comment on Article 2 of NATO and see if that could be recited about economic and why aren't we educating the people about Article 2 and the NATO. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, the president is over in Europe right now as we speak, meeting with our allies over there. Most Americans are concerned with us keeping, NATO has worked, and the reason that we put it together, America put it together, was to ensure that there would not be a world war again. I think it's done what it's sought out to do. We've been able to work together to not only keep the peace in Europe, but to really support each other in our fight against terrorism and our fight in other areas as well. And I'm hopeful that despite some of the comments that are made, cooler heads and those diplomats, career diplomats that have been there, will able to do their work, and we're able to continue with the great work not only of keeping peace, but economic prosperity in the democratic world.
As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I want to ask you about the tariffs that are out there. And the president's tweeting this morning about them. And many countries in NATO, he says, which we are expected to defend, are not only short of their current commitment of 2%, delinquent for many years in payments that have not been made. Will they reimburse the U.S.? He also tweeted earlier today, what I wanted to point out was tweets about the tariffs and how things are not fair for the U.S. He has made that point repeatedly. In terms of agriculture, what are you most concerned about? Well,
I'm concerned, of course, for particularly our cattle owners, our livestock, pork and beef, as well as turkey, chicken. So much of that is consumed here in the United States, but a large portion of that is sent overseas, particularly to Asian countries for pork, as well as our beef to other countries. And these farmers need to be able to export these goods. That's been a mainstay for them. And we're concerned that the tariffs are going to negatively impact what is, in the heartland of America, our agriculture, which has really been quite a bit of our backbone.
Just to get it out there, the president tweeted, I am in Brussels, but always thinking about our farmers. Soybeans fell 50% from 2012 until my election came along. Farmers have done poorly for 15 years. Other countries' trade barriers and tariffs have been destroying their businesses. I will open things up better than ever before, but I can't go too quickly. I am fighting for a level playing field for our farmers, and we will win. Any other reaction there?
I don't know if that's necessarily why the reasons that some of those prices have gone down. Competition has really been stiff. The farm bill that we've been trying to do has been we've been trying to put incentives for our farmers to be able to grow their businesses and to expand the amount of areas and the exports that they may be able to do. Restricting it, I don't think, is necessarily the way that we're going to be able to grow our economy.
Mike is on the line from Glendale, Arizona, Republican for Delegate Stacey Plaskett. Hello, Mike.
Hello. I have a question about whether or not Peter Strzok you think is going to testify. I believe that he will not. He will plead the fifth, just like Page, because he will be exposed if he speaks. And so if we're still on the issue of that, I'd like to know what you think about that.
I think that he will testify. He spent 11 hours testifying behind closed doors, which is probably much more difficult and probably more revealing than the unclassified questions that you're going to be receiving. Listen, I think we're swallowing a gnat and trying and letting a horse go through us in this instance. Peter Strzok, while his comments were deplorable and were very unprofessional, was not the ultimate decision maker in the investigation of Secretary Clinton. There were others involved in that. And as to his involvement in the special counsel, once it was found out that his positions and those text messages that were sent on government phones, he was removed. He's been reassigned, and the work has continued. So I think we're trying to, we're being given a shiny object, which is Peter Strzok, and Americans need to take their focus off of that and put their focus on the larger issues that are affecting us. What is the special counsel going to find? What is the taxes going to do to average Americans in the next year? Not the immediate tax relief that they've gotten, but over time. When is an infrastructure bill going to be taken care of? And are places like the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico ready if another hurricane comes to those areas? I think that those are the things that Americans are concerned about. How are their needs being met? Not the shiny object of Peter Strzok.
Let's hear from Kathy, Bethel, Delaware, Republican. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, both of you.
Good morning.
I believe I just heard the lady say that there was nothing to come out of the Benghazi investigation. Isn't that how we found the Hillary Clinton email? And at the risk of beating a dead horse, when President Obama was in office, he did nothing about NATO. He did nothing about North Korea, did nothing about Russia, did nothing. So I am appalled at the Democrats indicating that Donald Trump is on the wrong track. He is most certainly a leader of the free world, and he is showing it. And thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. I think that what you're saying is that we found out about the emails, but was there criminality involved in it? Was it carelessness? Yes, that's what the investigation showed. Was there criminality? No. When you look at Special Counsel Mueller's investigation, you have 20 indictments and already 5 guilty pleas. So I think when you're weighing in the balance, there really is not much there. And as for what's happened in North Korea, we don't have a deal as yet. We have a lot of talk. But until that deal comes through, until there is true disarmament, and even the CIA director and others have said that that has not happened. Our new Secretary of State said that that has not happened. We're a long way off.
What do you make of the president's nominee for Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh?
Right. I think that it was a very smart move on his part to pick someone who is a steady conservative, but also has stellar a background in terms of his jurisprudence. I think that it will be interesting to see him talk about the law review articles that he has written, as well as the report that he wrote when he worked for Ken Starr in the investigation when it comes to whether or not a sitting president can be charged or can be indicted or even impeached for lying or obstructing justice. I think those are the things that people will focus on. I think that this is a good pick for President Trump as a Republican to pick, someone who will be difficult for those that are in purple states, Democrats in purple states to oppose, and also puts everyone in the crosshairs here. What I find also interesting is that this does show us how important the Supreme Court is, how important our third branch of government, the judiciary, is, and also the issues that are still potentially moving here. We've had a lot of focus on Roe v. Wade, but there is issues of voting rights. There are issues of affirmative action. There are issues of same-sex that people should be focused on as well.
James, Lawrence, Massachusetts, Democratic caller. Hi there.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to ask the delegate, she claimed that she was a prosecutor, if she's ever heard of sequestering witnesses, because I don't believe that Lisa Page should be entitled to know the testimony of Strzok and then go and be allowed to memorize it and then go in and tailor her answers to that. The whole point of it, as a prosecutor, she must have used the tool of sequestering witnesses. You do that to find out who's lying and who isn't. And I just think it's a little disingenuous to say that she should be allowed transcripts and to allow every access to his testimony and then expect the truth from her. And how it just doesn't smack right.
Thanks.
Right.
Let's hear
So
from the delegate.
You're talking about the smell test and all of this. Listen, I'm not defending Lisa Page. I think that her attorney is doing what he needs to do to defend his client and to support her. Is she going to get that information? I'm not sure. But the notice, there are issues of notice and the timing as well that she's been able to raise, which are valid questions. And I think she's going to play this out as much as she can. I'm heartened by the fact that Peter Strzok gave both committees 11 hours of testimony behind closed doors in deposition, and that, we are asking, the Democrats are asking that an unclassified version of that transcript be put out for the American people to be able to see what exactly he said.
To the line for Democrats, to Arizona now. Arizona, what's your name?
Genius Robert is my name.
Go ahead, please, sir.
Yes, this is the age of empire. This is the age of how labor is considered in the world. And what made that so, I go back in history all the time. What made that so is a ruling by, I guess it was Nixon in 1971. Richard M. Nixon in 1971 took us off the gold standard. What that did is it opened up the whole world to take over our industries, because at that time, the second rank, we were stronger than the second-ranked economy by 18 times. When the press confronted Nixon about that item, he just mentioned, we're going to have a lot more customers. Yeah, that's true, but all our jobs disappeared because it became more of empire. When the pirate ships landed in this hemisphere, which was America, and the people that were here were consequently Americans, and they were called Indians, that's called empire, when you take over something. What they've done is take over, the Republicans have taken over the labor force of the whole world, and the consequence is that this new president has to deal with Russia to scratch his head and find out what he can do about it.
Thanks for calling.
I think that one of the things that your last caller brings up that's really important is what age are we in, and how does America continue to innovate and continue to make itself great? I know that in the Virgin Islands, we're really seeing the time that we have after the hurricanes as a way as well to innovate and to change ourselves. I've really pressed our governor and our elected officials down there to use the funding that the federal government is giving us in a way that allows our economy to grow. I know that our governor today is going to be announcing some of the monies that we have received from HUD. We're receiving $243 million from HUD for the rebuilding of our territory. We talk a lot about Puerto Rico and the utilities that they lost. The Virgin Islands lost a lot in terms of our hospitals, our schools, right now are completely decimated. And so this money is going to be used for the rebuilding of the Virgin Islands. We have been short-shrifted over many years in terms of federal funding that we received. In the 1990s, we were taken off of the formulas for transportation and highways. We do not receive the same money in terms of Medicaid and Medicare support in other areas as well. So really utilizing, and shock doctrine, utilizing the decimation of an area to really try and rebuild.
How are the people there doing, your constituents?
Well, everyone, our motto after this has been VI Strong. because you've never seen a more resilient people immediately after the storm. Even before FEMA and others were able to get there, the Department of Defense, people got themselves out. We're helping neighbors, we're clearing roads, we're looking for those that were lost. We lost our internet, lost our phone capacity, and people were basically writing on paper everyone that they found, getting that up by satellite or other way so that people outside of the Virgin Islands can know that people were safe. And so we have been able to do things on our own. We're American citizens. We die in greater capacity per capita than others, giving the ultimate sacrifice in the military, and we're asking America to be responsible to us as well. So the funding that we're receiving, homeowner rehabilitation, 10 million, new construction for home ownership, 10 million, rental rehabilitation of 5 million, public and affordable housing, 32 million, supportive housing and sheltering program, 15 million, and it goes on. Economic revitalization, 33 million. We want the Virgin Islands to be rebuilt, and that's what the people of the Virgin Islands are asking local officials as well.
Just a little over 100,000 people, correct?
Yes, we have about 105,000. It has been larger, our economy. We had the closing of a refinery in 2012. At one time, we had the second largest refinery in the Western Hemisphere. When that closed, we lost a lot of jobs. Our employment skyrocketed to 18%. Our governor's recently announced the reopening, and so we're trying to rebuild and reopen, not just in terms of tourism, but knowledge-based businesses, IT, data storage, et cetera, so that our economy can boom.
Let's go to New York City, the borough of the Bronx. Democratic caller, Saria, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I just couldn't agree with that last caller more, speaking about economic revitalization and allowing our economy to grow. So I'm curious on the topic of government reform, if we could speak about the benefits the U.S. would receive if we focus more on international development and new consumer markets in developing countries rather than ruining the trade relations we have now.
Oh, I think that's a great idea and a great question. And I know that, I'm also a member of the New Democratic Coalition, which is a group of Democrats who are really interested in business and the idea of growing economies to build not just, raising new businesses, growing our infrastructure is a way to raise the tide as well socially. And I think exploring other technologies in developing countries, which have really been great innovators and really supporting that and American investment in that is a great way for us to grow as well.
You've mentioned infrastructure a couple of times. What were you anticipating in the last year or so, and why hasn't a bill come forth?
Well, the president, of course, talked about $3 trillion to be expended in transportation. We've been disappointed that money does not really change the equation between how much the federal government is giving and how much local municipalities receive. For the most part, it's an 80-20 mix between the federal government and local. But what invariably happens is that those areas which already have a surplus of funding are able to utilize the money and are able to continue to build their infrastructure. Whereas rural areas, those that have already been left behind, do not. And what some of us are hoping to see is to incentivize or support rural areas to come up to where the urban areas are in terms of infrastructure. Staying here in Washington, D.C., you can't but notice the tremendous amount of transportation and infrastructure development here because they have the economy to do that. But places like the Virgin Islands or other rural areas, farming areas, are really continuing to fall behind. And the federal government has got to be able to support that in terms of transportation, in our rail, as well as our airports, and also in infrastructure and public infrastructure in those areas.
One last call, James from Collins, Mississippi, independent caller. Hi, James.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, ma'am. I know you say you represent the Virgin Islands.
Yes, sir.
But I wanted to ask you, first I want to ask you one question. I just heard the lady talk about this lady not wanting to testify, and you gave a pretty good answer, but my point is this here, and then I have another one, but how is it that the Republicans can be so upset with her and anybody else that will not go in front of them and be tested, but the president they protect him. They protect him and say that he's the president of the United States of America, so he shouldn't have to testify. He shouldn't be impeached. So it's kind of strange to me how Fox News is continuing to slam these people and say, well, they need to testify, we need to have an investigation. But when it comes to the President of the United States of America, and I'm pretty sure some of the people that have been convicted or pleading guilty on these crimes, they're just setting it up for them to say that there's a disagreement and it's fake news. It's fake. Everything is fake. But with him, you watch Fox News and you say, well, you say that, well, something is not right because they continue to say that it's fake news, it's fake news. But all of a sudden, when it benefits them, they say it's real news. And I want to ask you one more question. What is it about brown and black people and people and some poor Caucasian people now that this administration and this situation now is becoming more racist? Because here in Mississippi is moving forward beyond the past. But it seems like the other nations or other states are beginning to draft in that old thing that Mississippi was going through. It makes me wonder, why is the Republicans and these Christians or evangelicals are giving this man this respect? And like the whatever name, the secretary used a verse out of the Bible, Romans something, but he did not complete the whole chapter of the book, and they just went crazy over it.
James, thank you. Want to get one last comment before we wrap things up with the delegate. Go ahead, please.
Sure. I think we live in a polarized society right now, whether it comes to race or gender equality, sexual orientation, and it's a conversation that America really needs to have with itself that it's been avoiding. And I think that what we're seeing now is it coming to a head at this point. I'm hopeful for myself, not just for myself, but for my children and all of our young people, that they're able to really reflect and do better than what they've seen many of us do, not only in government, but in business and elsewhere. We're seeing that throughout this country. But I'm hopeful when I talk to my colleagues here, or when I talk especially to young people, that there is hope for this country and there's hope for us. Just yesterday, or was it Monday, I was at Georgetown University at my alma mater, speaking with kids from all over the world, all over this country, at the Junior Statesman Association. And the amount of energy and the amount of hope and determination that they have to make our country great, and the passion that they have for America really spurs me on as well. And so I just want to thank them, and particularly, of course, the young people who were representing the Virgin Islands that were there, that we're counting on them.
Delegate Stacey Plaskett, Democrat from the Virgin Islands, member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, among other committees. Thanks a lot for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.
We will take a short break and then be back with another member of the U.S. House, Congressman Francis Rooney, Republican of Florida, who's on the Foreign Affairs Committee, plus more of your calls. Be right back.